I'm Leila Darrenville, founder of Tyne and Wor Culture Freelancers. And I want to say thank you for being here, especially those of you who are freelance. I know the last 5 months have probably been the hardest of your working career, but we need to be really honest and agree that the struggle didn't start when COVID-19 entered the room. What events of the pandemic did was highlight how precarious our industry is. It's magnified inequalities across the globe. And for those of us in the creative and cultural sector, that's focused around the workforce, as well as government's approach to the industry. Who we are, the freelancers. We make up around 50% of the creative workforce, with around 70% of the theatre workforce being freelance. We work in every area of the cultural sector, from technicians to producers, actors, artists, musicians, marketers, coaches, dancers. I could literally carry on all day. A higher proportion of women, carers, people from low socioeconomic backgrounds and people of colour make up the freelance workforce compared to those situated in organisations. I'm not going to try and unpick why that might be, but I am going to point out that the precarious nature of the work plus the pandemic means that we're quickly compounding inequalities that already exist within the sector. We work with most, if not all, of the cultural organisations in the North East, with many of us working nationally and internationally too. Our practice and work might be quite different, but our strengths and challenges are so often the same. Organisations who collaborate with us do so at great benefit to themselves. We are the backbone of the industry, yet also the ones who often have to create our own financial stability by trying to make our own precariousness less precarious by having several strings to our bow, whether that's teaching, working front of house, in bars and cafes, selling stuff from home, or many, many more of the millions of second, third and fourth jobs. Around 3 months ago, I was approached by Newcastle Council to do a bit of surveying with them on the impact of COVID-19 on the freelance sector. It was in partnership with the North East Cultural Partnership, North of Tyne Combined Authority and Tyne and Wor Cultural Freelancers. I'd already been thinking of doing my own pulse point testing to see what was worrying people the most, as it's so easy just to think everything, but it's much harder than to do something about it. The survey has highlighted where freelancers have been able to access support and where support structures have fallen through. It's also given people the opportunity to highlight their fears for themselves and the sector, and also some ideas of what they think we all might need going forward. I'm not going to go over the whole survey with you, but you will be able to download it at some point soon. I am going to cover some of the areas I feel that are the most important. The survey responses have also informed the breakout spaces for today, which is really great. The survey results were somber reading, especially when people are commenting on their personal worries, with financial fears meaning people are talking about potentially having to move and uproot their whole family. Added to this, the fear of the loss of earnings and loss of work was the fact that people couldn't see more jobs or work on the horizon. The sector's shrinking, and freelancers have been the first to see that and the first to feel it. 73% of respondents said they'd had significant loss of earnings, with 18% saying their earnings had reduced a little. Bearing in mind we carried this survey out in June, 11% of people didn't have enough money at that point. They were already in desperate circumstances, with 32% saying they couldn't survive until the end of July. They could survive until the end of July, but not beyond, and 37% saying they could survive until the end of September. Then talking about health and well-being, people talked about feeling disconnected physically, emotionally, and creatively from their cultural community. We had several people who cited caring responsibilities for children and vulnerable relatives being another stress point. When talking about the sector, people talked about the lack of work and funding, as well as venues reopening and audience confidence. But the one we're seeing played out right now, and is possibly the most worrying, is people and small organisations leaving the sector. We are at great risk of losing really amazing talent and creativity from our sector due to COVID-19. Like I said, fairly somber reading. We also asked participants to comment on things that they would like to see support the cultural sector. Personally, I think it's a great chance for us to work together to make sure change happens and create more equity going forward. And when I say together, I really do mean together. Let's make, so I'm going to take you through a little bit of a whistle-stop tour through the findings. So people asked for artist or professional development. A significant number of participants talked about professional development, artist development and professional support, but made it clear that it needs to be what people want. And it would be beneficial if the training was free and, if possible, if there was a level of financial support to help people attend. Creative leadership. Several participants talked about the level of creative leadership, whether from organisations or from individuals. It was stressed that within that, freelancers need to be in the thinking and in the decision making. Local strategy. It was various different people talked about things we can do at a really local level through our regions and sub-regions, looking at local strategy to support freelancers. Advocacy and communication and visibility, talking about the value of what we do better. So what the fact that arts and culture support the economy, mental health, creating more platforms for advocacy and communication. Cross-sector partnerships, looking beyond our own creative community and businesses to learn and connect to other people for mutual benefit. Unsurprisingly, people also talked about funding and finances. They talked about the extension of the Self-Employed Income Support Scheme grant, funding for funding to explore new ways of working, funding packages where funders and regularly funded organisations work together to support smaller organisations, and support for people to explore funding outside of Arts Council England, and also universal basic income. So what next? All the partners who are involved in the survey are taking information from it to inform their strategy. For Tyne and Wor Culture freelancers, this means a few different things. Doing more of what we have been doing, connecting, championing, creating opportunities for people to feel heard and together. Establishing as an organisation, fundraising, being involved in strategic plans across the North East, and establishing ways in which we can campaign together and work together to talk about what we do and why it's important. Now, I appreciate this is meant to be a little bit more of a presentation than a provocation, but I wanted to leave my time with you with a bit of a call to action. How can we all, individuals and organisations, work together to ensure our sector is stable and our workforce is safe and secure? That we don't need to fight to explain our value every single day. David Brailsford, who was the Olympic 2012 cycling coach, said it's important to understand the aggregation of marginal gains. Put simply, how small improvements in a number of different aspects of what we do can have a huge impact on the overall performance of a team. So if we all agree that equity and sector security is what we want, then we can all work together to make small changes in our own sphere of influence to affect that change. And if you feel unable to right now, that's okay too. Global recovery from COVID-19 and the resetting of the sector is definitely a long haul, and we need to take turns to be the energy that drives that change. Thank you.
Everyone, good morning. My name's Traynor. I'm an actor and I'm a theatre director, and I've been a freelancer now for 23 years. One of my very first jobs being here in the North East with Northumberland Touring Theatre Company. So I came to this profession from a small town in the west of Scotland, and a working class family who all had proper jobs and who had absolutely no connection to the arts whatsoever. In fact, none of them ever even had the occasion to wonder what the term freelancer even meant. So as I reflect back at the beginning of my career, and I think about how important it was to build strong foundations from the start, it's clear that I wasn't wholly prepared for what being a freelancer meant either. So especially in that first year, adjusting to the uncertainty of irregular work and competing for jobs when 90% of actors are unemployed at any one time, that was a bit of a shock. And I discovered in those first few years that being an actor wasn't just about constantly being available for auditions and jobs, or coping with the relentlessness of auditions and rejections, or even keeping my finger on the pulse of the industry in order to remain seen. It was also about being an effective business. And I sort of bluffed my way through that part, doing finances, filing tax returns, being an administrator, networking, all that stuff. All that stuff is the invisible and unpaid work, I realise, that's essential to survival in the business of being a theatre person. And no one ever told me about that. There was no module at drama school, no professional development along the way. It was just other helpful freelancers and their own experience giving me hints and tips here and there. And I've sort of survived just about for now, but I'm not sure how much of that was actually luck. So for me, one of the big issues is how do we make a more transparent and fair industry for graduates and for early career freelancers to sustain themselves and to thrive, especially now that we're in a period of such uncertainty. And as we all know, lockdown and this pandemic has shaken the very core of the performing arts sector. It's highlighted our vulnerability, how very close we are to losing not just the smaller organisations and buildings, but even the most established in the country. And when it comes to individuals, when it comes to freelancers, sadly, I already know many theatre makers who've had to seek alternative ways to make a living as a result of this pandemic. And I think that's probably just the tip of the iceberg. The next few months will be very telling, I think, for freelancers and their ability to survive this crisis as the self-employed support scheme comes to an end, and whilst we all wait for the reopening of our cultural venues in earnest. For me personally, I've tried to use this time positively as an opportunity to reflect. And I've had the privilege to be part of the Freelance task force, which for those of you who might not know, the Freelance task force is a network of 150 plus professionals from across the performing arts sector. And it was initiated by Fuel Theatre, who recognised during the early part of the lockdown a need for freelancers to make their position clear to the wider performing arts community. So organisations from across the UK were invited to sponsor a local representative for 1 day a week for 13 weeks to work as part of the task force to advocate for the wider freelance community. And in a competitive culture where freelancers are usually pitted against one another, this has been a really unique opportunity to come together and to use our collective experience to recognise from the inside the particular impact that COVID is having on us. And it's given us an opportunity to mitigate that impact. So what have we been doing? We've been speaking with industry bodies, such as the Society of London Theatres, UK Theatre, Equity, Arts Council England, and the Creative Industries Federation, among others. And we've been talking about our experience of the sector's effect on us and on our practice. And through these conversations, we've been able to help shape and influence industry thinking. And that's felt very exciting to be a part of for the first time. And only right, actually, since freelancers make up 70% of the theatre industry's workforce. It feels like a very welcome and a very positive first step. We've also had the opportunity as the task force to advocate for those who have fallen through the cracks of the government funding and to ask questions of the industry bodies and to continue campaigning for further financial support. And also to share our growing awareness about resources that are available to freelancers at the moment. We've also been looking at equality and inclusion within the industry, thinking about access, about pay structures, about well-being, and about representation not only within industry bodies but also within all organisations, potentially at board level. More regionally, myself and local theatre makers Liv Hunt and Shan Armstrong, we've come together to create a northeast hub of the freelance task force to support freelancers at a more local level. Recently we hosted a Northeast Culture Social online, and we're planning another digital event in the autumn to celebrate our regional talent. And so finally, it seems to me that this crisis has illustrated the strength of our individual parts, freelancers and organisations. It's illustrated that we can become even stronger together by listening to what the other needs. And sometimes I think these might be difficult conversations, not easy conversations, but I think that's okay, because if we rebuild this industry, not just influencing from the top down, but also from the bottom up, if we create this relationship of communication between freelancers and organisations, and we create strong foundations that serve everyone, I think we'll have a chance to emerge from this crisis a much stronger, much richer and a much fairer sector.
From a venue perspective, the term freelancer covers a whole range of different relationships, from someone employed on a regular basis to lead creative learning activity, to an actor paid to rehearse and perform in a show for a fixed period of time, to a comedian paid to perform at a one-off gig. And I think whilst the impact of COVID has probably been the same for all freelancers, for venues, I think it's really highlighted these differing relationships. In the short term, I think there are really only two things we can practically do as venues to support freelancers. The first is to acknowledge you, to communicate with you in the same way that we do with customers and staff, to remind you that you're part of the organisation and keep you posted about our plans. I think that especially applies to those of you who we work with on a regular basis. And I know in the early days of lockdown, lots of artists and freelancers felt very shut out of conversations. And there was a sense that venues were making plans for the future and not involving freelancers. And I'd just say that in my experience, the truth was that artists weren't being excluded. It's just that those conversations weren't actually happening. We knew no more about what was going to happen and when we were going to reopen than anyone else. But it was really important that we came out and said that, so people didn't feel excluded. The second thing I think we can do is to get back to a position where we can offer you work as soon as possible. And for organisations like ARC, the breadth of our programme, the variety of our spaces and our business model means that we have the flexibility to reopen now. So some of our regular freelancers will be back in paid work in September. It feels like COVID has made freelancers more visible, and I hope that that can lead to some longer term change. It's incredibly frustrating to see artists positioned against venues. We're all part of the same landscape and we are interdependent. And it sometimes feels like venues are the bad people who take up all the money. But I believe our role is really important in terms of connecting artists to audiences. There's a really unhelpful perception that venues get most of their money from the Arts Council and that this could just be given directly to artists. But part of our role is to multiply that money many times over, not just through ticket sales, but through other trading activity. Undoubtedly, there's going to be less public money for the arts in the next few years. That is the reality. So we're going to need to work even harder at generating our own income at a time when that income has just been reduced to zero. So we have to find a better way of working together. I don't think it's rocket science. It's about being clear and transparent, about being honest, about paying people fairly and on time. That is one of my biggest bugbears. There's no excuse for organisations not to pay freelancers on time. And just making sure that expectations on either side are realistic. Venues are facing massive challenges. we've lost 80% of our income at ARC. So things aren't magically going to get back to normal. It's going to be a long, slow rebuild back in terms of audiences and income. And we're going to need freelancers to work with us to achieve that. And that might mean sharing the risk. So we're restarting lots of our regular classes for adults and young people in September. And we honestly don't know how many people are going to come back. What we're saying to our regular freelance practitioners is that we'll pay them to deliver classes. But if we don't get enough people, we might not be able to carry on. So there's a new cancellation clause in their contract. We've been really upfront about this because the alternative is that we don't take that risk. We don't restart classes until there's a vaccine or whatever, and those freelancers will be out of work for even longer. So sharing that risk is the only way forward. As I said, venues hold many different kind of relationships with freelancers. And clearly the way we might interact with someone who performs a one-off gig is going to be different to someone who works with us on an ongoing basis. But I hope that going forward, venues can more clearly start to treat freelancers as part of their workforce. You wouldn't pay salaries late, so don't pay freelance invoices late. If you're offering training opportunities to staff, maybe consider opening it up to freelancers. And when you're talking to staff about the future, talk to your freelancers too. Thank you.